Hello and welcome to the webinar. Hope you can all hear us okay. So, my name's Lorna and Darren, as you can see from the screen, and I am from Remit Consulting. I'm a chartered surveyor and I've been with Remit for a couple of years now, and I'm one of the partners. Darren?
Good morning, everybody. I'm an independent property market analyst, and I've been working with Remit now on this project for about 2 years. In fact, a little over 2 years, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to talk for about 15 to 20 minutes about this Project Return, which is tracking occupancy for around 150 UK offices on a weekly basis. Since mid-May 2021, so just over 2 years now, we've been recording a time series of office usage within and after the pandemic. It's a unique project, and we get quite a lot of good PR on the back of it and conduct things like webinars, which is all very pleasant to share the news. We'll cover a bit of detail about the contributors, how we collect the data, the sample and so forth. And then Darren is going to give you some high-level context and run through the key findings for you. We will then cover why this project is so important and some of the issues that we have faced and challenges involved in collecting the data. This webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, because we're monitoring the chat so that we can then deal with the questions at the end. So first of all, a little bit about Remit and how we became involved in this project and monitoring returners. We have a distinct position amongst consultants. We only advise within the world of real estate, and over our 20 years in business, we've built up a very strong relationship with all the major property and asset management companies, to the point where they're happy to share their data with us. We've also formed very strong bonds with investors, developers, etc., so that they come to us with questions they want answered. 2 years ago, a group of the leaders of the major property influencers, previously known as the Windsor Group, now known as the Property Advisors Forum, they came to us and asked if we could possibly gauge the appetite for workers to return to the office. Within 2 weeks, we had our contacts on board. That was the hardest part, if I'm honest, just convincing them that what we were going to do would be of use to everybody. So we also had developed a portal for data input, because the key to the success was the ease and willingness of compliance of the participants. The timing was set up such that it was about a month before there was going to be an announcement about another easing lockdown. And so it was good to get it started just in time for that. So as I said previously, the sample covers around 150 offices in 9 UK cities, although you might be able to see from the slides that the sample sizes vary from city to city, with about half of them in London, which is not really surprising. Within the sample, we've got around 1,500 leases and over 200,000 workers. So it's a pretty robust sample. What we do is we work on buildings that have access control systems, because then we know that we're accurately recording the true number of people rather than standing in a foyer with a clipboard and counting. We haven't listed the contributors on here, but there are a dozen or so of the big property managers, and British Land, Cushman, Knight Frank, MAP, amongst others. And what they have done is they've got their building managers to once a week check the access control systems and enter the daily data on the portal. And the data that they record are the number of occupiers entering the building, the number of visitors entering the building, and if car parking is relevant, then they record the number of car parking spaces that are used. And so now Darren is going to run through some of the findings and the impact.
Okay, thanks, Lorna, and good morning to you all. I'm sure most of us on the call today have the flexibility of being able to work from home, and certainly in the property industry, we're all very focused on how many people are going back to the office, what policies companies have got in terms of mandating people back, and so on, all that kind of stuff. But I think it is worth remembering that still around 60% of the workforce has to be on site. So if you go back to the time before COVID, only around 12% of people actually work from home, so quite a small minority. And if you go back through the various lockdown periods, the percentage of people actually working from home peaked at around 49%. So it was actually less than half, even at the peak of all the lockdowns. And the recent data from the ONS, survey based, shows that it's been fluctuating between about 30 and 40%, as you can see from that graph. So do bear in mind that the majority of the workforce still has to be on site. We're in a minority, and quite a privileged minority, I think. So do bear that in mind. And if you look geographically, there's some very big variations in home working across different parts of the workforce. Here we've mapped it by local authority. So this is percentage of people working from home on a regular basis. You can see that it's particularly strong around London and the southeast, which isn't really a surprise. And that includes that M4 corridor going out to the west of London, where you've that sort of triangular wedge shape, where all the tech jobs are. You've got a few outliers in the rural areas, which are probably people working in agriculture, tourism, and then you've got people like fund managers running their firms out of Dorset, Devon and Cornwall, and so on. You're also much more likely to work from home if you earn more, if you're in a more senior role, if you're older. So that's a bit of context for you. And then just on data collection issues, the list on this slide you could really apply to any project, not just project return. As Laura alluded to earlier, the first one is getting the initial buy-in from your data providers, getting them to commit to providing the data to you on a timely, regular basis and to a good standard. There are normal issues around confidentiality, particularly if you're collecting data which is commercially sensitive, which this is. So for the return project, we got them to, we agreed to maintain confidentiality. So we designed a database whereby we couldn't identify individual buildings. That was particularly important for participants. That links to how you store and analyze the data. So ideally you want a database which is easy to use for the people that are inputting the data into it, and for us at our end when we're trying to extract it and analyze it. Everyone's got to understand the definitions of what you're tracking. There are often issues around small sample sizes, and the data's got to be accurate, otherwise you lose all your credibility. And if you're using other external sources like we have been doing for return, we need to know that it's good quality and that we can get hold of it to fit within our timescale. So we've committed to producing a regular report. So we need to make sure that we can access all this other data on a regular and timely basis. What about the actual results then? The blue line on the graph represents the national average occupancy figures based on the hard data we get from the building managers. That's expressed as a percentage of the number of occupiers in the building. As you can see, if you go back to early part of 2021, the process of going back to the office has been very slow. It's been very stop-start. Bear in mind, when we first started the project back in May 2021, quite a lot of the COVID restrictions were still in place. If you remember, we got Omicron right at the end of the year, and a lot of the Christmas parties were cancelled. People actually still had to self-isolate up to February of 2022. So that meant lots of parents were at home, kids were off school, and all that. The big dips you see with the lines are for Christmas and New Year. Obviously, not many people are in the office over that period. You also tend to get falls in occupancy when you've got industrial action, particularly on the transport network. We often get asked, have we got data pre-COVID? The answer is, I'm afraid not. We don't have precise data on occupancy before the pandemic. What we do know, though, is that offices were never 100% full. We reckon average occupancy was somewhere between 60 and 80%, depending on the individual building and company. And if we take that 80% figure as the hypothetical maximum, then average occupancy is actually around 40%, as you can see from that red line on the graph. Coincidentally, it happens to be a similar figure to the percentage of people working from home that we referred to earlier, but it's not the same thing. On this slide, we drill down into the individual city data. We've got Glasgow, Leeds, and London. I should mention these figures are also not adjusted. From the start of the survey, it was very clear that some cities like Leeds were doing much better, bouncing back much more quickly than London was. For Glasgow, that's always been a laggard in this survey. Remember that the restrictions in Scotland were around for much longer. They were much tighter. You had that work from home guidance in place for much longer. Glasgow also had very high COVID rates, much higher than Edinburgh, for example. But even after the restrictions have been lifted, it's still lagged behind the UK. Not to make any political points here, but I suspect it's got something to do with the high proportion of public sector jobs, but don't want to sort of cast any aspersions about any other parts of the economy. And again, with regard to London, here we split it out into the main submarkets. Again, it's non-adjusted data. The West End was really the first to come back strongly, although recently Docklands has been performing more strongly, which we think is probably something to do with the banks putting more pressure on their staff to come back in person. The city has been consistently average, actually. And I think there's an emerging view that locations which are purely work focused, which don't have those broader amenities which make a place attractive, they are going to struggle going forward. They're going to struggle to get workers back in person. I think that's where the West End actually has a distinct advantage over other parts of London, and other markets like Midtown and Southwark, for example, they've been much slower to come back. Here we've got occupancy by days of the week. Again, it's non-adjusted. You can see from the red, yellow, and green lines, you've got that clear pattern of high occupancy on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, which makes that amusing acronym. Now we're regularly pushing 40% occupancy on those days of the week, not every week, but quite frequently. Fridays, which is the black line, are generally a write-off. It's probably Fridays are probably averaging around 20%, and Mondays are also less busy for obvious reasons, and that's the blue line on the graph. Again, the steep dips represent bank holiday Mondays and Christmas holidays, when you've got very few people in the office. Over Christmas, we've been tracking occupancy at just 3 or 4%. So there are some sad people who go in. But fortunately, it is a minority who do so over Christmas and the New Year. We also track visitor numbers, which are another useful indicator of activity, and it sort of shows you the extent to which people are getting out and about and doing face-to-face meetings. Here we've expressed it as an index, but our buildings are regularly getting over 25,000 visitors a week during the busiest weeks, probably 18 to 20,000 a week on average. So it's quite a good sample. And we talked about other data sources earlier. We do like to supplement our data with other sources so we get a more rounded picture of what's happening. Here are some of the sources we've used in the past. Some of you will no doubt be familiar with the Google mobility data. That was very helpful. unfortunately, they stopped producing it last October, I think it was. We've also tracked the weather, vaccination rates, just to see how they're influencing occupancy. You'll have heard of the PRET data. That's also very helpful. It's interesting because it shows you again how Scotland has been lagging behind other parts of the country in terms of its recovery. Also how suburban London has benefited at the expense of central London with all the home working. The transport data is also very informative. It tells us that we're making 15 to 20% fewer trips by train, bus and tube. But at the weekend, we're all getting out and about in our cars. So moving around the weekend is back to where it was pre-COVID. You got that big drop on work days. You might recall Jacob Rees-Mogg trying to get civil servants back in the office. Actually, the central government departments have been doing quite well. They produce stats for about 20 central London Whitehall departments, and they're running at about 65-66% on average. People from the Ministry of Defence have been very good at 80 or 90% on average for obvious reasons, I think. Government gets a bit of criticism because it tends to be those local government agencies and the quangos like the DVLA, HMRC, those tend to be the people not back in the office. But like I said, central London is actually done quite well. So that's a run through of our key findings and some of the other data sources that we use. Lorna's now going to talk a bit more about the wider importance of the project and what we think it means for the office market.
Thank you, Darren. Obviously, returning to the office is a massive issue, not just for the property sector, but for the whole economy and the way that we live, work and conduct business. It has massive implications, not just for office owners and occupiers, but for the urban planners, transport systems, shops, restaurants and city centres, and even companies in the logistics and distribution sectors. The data we're collecting is a crucial part of helping to understand the growth of the hybrid working model and where it might finally settle. And it's also worth mentioning that the return to the office situation cuts across other areas of the research that we do. For example, we do research into active travel and Remark, which is our 10-year running record of the collection of rent and service charge. So combining all these things together, you're beginning to get a picture of office workers, not forgetting, of course, as Darren said, that actually only 40% of the working population works in, can work from home, so probably works in an office the rest of the time. The shift towards hybrid working is really making developers and occupiers think about the appropriate levels of provision, because we know, we've seen from the stats that the occupancy varies by the day of the week. And so have we got too much office space? I mean, this remains a debate in the short term as we're getting conflicting stories, and you've only got to look at the London skyline to see how many new office buildings are going up. DEGW, who were around, if anyone remembers DEGW, absorbed by ACOM, they were architects who researched the type of offices that we need back in 1971. It's not that different now. Flexibility was considered key then, it is now. A good example is Nomura in Angel Lane. They've got one whole floor dedicated to health and fitness. So they're attracting talent who is interested in being fit and healthy. So it's definitely a question of the quality of the office that is important. So the upside of making your office the place you really want to be is Generation Z, or whatever letter or number we've got up to now, are being tempted back to quality offices, which offer them more than just a desk and a chair, which is obviously important in the war for talent, and also in getting the younger generation to learn by osmosis. Downside, though, we know that Facebook pre-COVID, they were throwing away 2 tons of fresh food per day because they were providing food, and goodness knows what is happening now while they're trying to attract people back. And another well-known household name that we're aware of, they have their staff, they're trying to deal with this, they're going in for a free breakfast, using the gym, and then going home to work. So productivity as well, there's everyone thinks you're more productive at home, but are we? Research suggests that in the initial quarantine, there was a massive upward spike in productivity. But over time, and now we're all getting a little bit fatigued with the screen time, loneliness, isolation, and too many Zoom calls or webinars, the research is suggesting more of a downward turn in productivity. And we're also potentially heading for issues with lack of ergonomic equipment at home. It's quite apparent that the office hasn't yet reached its final destination in terms of occupancy. And it's difficult to say where the dust will settle, because just when we think that the figures are stabilising, something else happens and it changes again. Whatever the outcome, things are not going to be like they were before the pandemic. And obviously a key part of understanding that process is collecting and analysing the data, whether you're doing employee surveys, interviewing people, or using technology to monitor usage in a building. It's absolutely critical to have that data to support the decisions you make. And as one last final comment, we do have a special offer on our subscription to our return report, and we will be putting the latest version of the report on our website, and we can forward details to you after this webinar. And that is the end of this presentation. So we're open for questions. We have some in the QA. Robert Patterson-Walters, is this based on individuals working at any point at home during the working week, i.e. hybrid or solely at home?
I think that's one for me, Lorna, and I think it refers to the graph of the government data. And Robert, I think the answer to your question is that it's one of the government social surveys, and the question is something like, did you work at home at any point last week? That is, and I can't remember the sample size, but that's the question. So it's not measuring the frequency of which people work from home, i.e. number of days of the week or whatever. It's did they or did they not work from home? So that's the answer to that one.
Beth Margetson, do we have any data for the West Midlands? Well, we do for Birmingham, yes, don't we, Darren?
We do, yeah.
Initially, we were hoping to have to break it down into market sectors like we do in London, but actually the properties we have, although we don't know which individual buildings they are, they tend to be in the centre of Birmingham, and that's included in the report. Will the slides be made available for attendees? Well, there will be, we can make the slides available if you wish, but also, as I said, if you want to sign up for a year's worth of the report, we're doing a special offer for June. It will be £800 for a year's worth of reports until the end of June. Just type in freebie or something and you'll get the thing. How long will we be continuing the study? That's from Anonymous. Initially, I'll be absolutely honest here, when we first started it, I thought it would have a shorter shelf life than it has, but we are still continually being asked for the data, for the reports. And I think because it is actual hard data rather than anecdotal evidence, it seems busy. Have you considered recording data from buildings without access systems? We have, but we're reliant on we want the reliability of the data is probably the best way of putting it. And we can trust the data we've got. And it would be quite labour intensive. And as we said earlier, it's all about compliance from the very helpful building managers doing this. And we don't want to add to their workload. It takes them about 10 minutes once a week to do this for us. Charles Gardner, am I correct in thinking you presented a slide showing a trend towards reduced office visitor numbers? If so, any thoughts about why?
The answer to that one is, it
There was a
fluctuates like
slide
mad.
that showed a bit of a dip, wasn't there?
Yeah, it's indexed based on the first week we collected it. It's up and down like mad, but it does correlate to office occupancy more generally. It goes up and down in line with, you know, the bank holidays, the strikes, Christmas, New Year, potentially the weather, though we've not dug into it that deeply to sort of establish a correlation in that respect. It's up and down is the answer to that one.
Please, can you go over the points around the 40% office occupancy, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and your thoughts around how it compares to pre-pandemic data?
So thoughts around Monday to when? Well, we reckon we kicked this around quite a bit, didn't we, Lorna, at the beginning between ourselves and a number of other practitioners. We were trying to work out just exactly what I think were offices full. And some people said 70, others were saying 80. I think someone said 50. There's a whole range of opinions on this.
We actually had at the Workplace Trends Summit, someone was saying it was typically 30 to 35% of some offices.
Which we would say was probably too low, isn't it? So we've settled on between 60 to 80. We run the numbers based on 60 and 80. You could go for somewhere in between. If we did take that hypothetical maximum of 80%, we reckon occupancy is probably just under 50% as an average, and it's possibly a little bit higher on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So you might be getting between 50 and 60% Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you're taking the pre-COVID sort of hypothetically full figure, that's what we would say.
We've got quite a few more questions. I'm trying to pick questions from people. Hamish Smith, do you have stats on the dispersion of occupancy rates across the sample, and can you give any insights on this? I think all we can say there is that they do vary quite widely, and this is aggregated data. I think that's but Darren, do you want to add to that answer?
Only that we can't possibly tag or collect the sector for every single tenant in every single building. We just, it's very difficult to go into that level of detail.
Apologies if I mispronounce your name. Is it Jacopo Dettoni? Possibly, or Jacopo. Your study shows occupancy is currently at about 40% nationwide and about 30% in the city. What's your estimate for pre-pandemic occupancy in the UK and the city? I'm going to say this is purely an estimate because we weren't recording it pre-pandemic, but I would have said probably the occupancy in the city was a lot higher than it is now. And that's largely because it's a sort of, it's like a snowball effect. There aren't many people going into the city, so there aren't the small shops and the sandwich shops and the bars opening, so people don't go into the city as much because there's not as much life in the city. But that's purely a guess. The West End has and nationwide has always been, there's more going on, and therefore there'll be people going in, but that's just my opinion, not based on anything in particular. We've got time. Oh, we haven't got time for any more. I believe we've finished now, haven't we? I was going to say we've got some other ones. We'll try and answer those in the chat, and then I believe that can be sent to you. Apologies for not being able to answer any more, and thank you for your time.